Welcome to Resilient. Hosted by Matthew Mingy, Resilient is a podcast about hope, transformation, and the redeeming power of God's love. Born out of Matthew's experience in jail ministry, the podcast shares inspiring stories of people who've overcome addiction, incarceration, and despair through Christ. Each episode features authentic conversations, powerful lessons, and practical encouragement, all delivered with a warm and approachable tone. The goal is to remind listeners that no one is beyond God's reach and to offer hope for a life of healing, purpose, and resilience. Listeners are invited to join the journey, share the message, and embrace God's grace no matter where they are in life. Welcome back to Resilient, where we share real stories of transformation through Christ. Today, I'm joined by Stephen, a man whose journey is a powerful testimony of God's redemption. After moving 13 times as a child, he searched for belonging in all the wrong places. Motorcycle clubs, skinhead organizations, even the Klu Klux Klan. But God broke through, completely transforming his life. Today, Stephen is not just a survivor of his past, he's a living example of restoration. His book, Restored, isn't just his story, it's a guide for anyone looking to experience true freedom and healing in Christ. Let's dive into this conversation and hear how God continues to use Stephen's life for his glory. Hey, Stephen. Welcome to Resilient Podcast. I'm excited to dive into your story and to talk about your book, Restored. But before we get into that, let's kick things off with a few icebreaker questions. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you could give yourself one piece of advice before your struggles began, what would that advice be?
I think truly and honestly, the answer to that would be follow Christ, because it was about a 30-year period I didn't, and it would have helped in a whole lot of turmoil and past mistakes.
Excellent. I agree. All right, number 2, what's one thing that always makes you laugh, no matter what?
I have a 5-pound Chihuahua. Of all things, that the heavily bald tattooed guy has a dog named Pinky, who I rescued, and keeps me laughing all the time.
Okay, that's good. That reminds me of the old cartoons where the big cartoon or the big elephant is scared of the little mouse.
I juggled, I did a bunch of stuff like that. I literally wanted to be a circus clown.
Wow, okay. That's cool. All right, number 4. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just kind of laughed at things kind of gone full circle, and I'm not a clown, but I did a lot of clownish things.
I'll let you admit to that. Number 4, what's a small, everyday thing you now appreciate that you once took for granted?
Waking up, and I have to say it to you this way, Matt. I have a gratitude list that I start every morning. And the very first thing on it for 868 days now is this morning I got up, I breathed on the mirror, and it fogged up. And then I looked out the window, and there weren't any bars on it.
Wow. Now, when you were in prison, did you do this gratitude list?
No.
Did you have a window in prison?
If they wanted to call it that, it wasn't the width of my head, but it was there.
That's what I hear a lot. Okay, good. If you could have dinner with any biblical figure outside of Jesus, who would it be? Peter, how come?
Just as we study his story and his trials and how he stood forward by his faith, my question would be kind of in the early days with some of the trial and turmoil, how did you do it? So I'd like to learn tremendously a lot more from him.
That's a resilience building story right there, and that's a good question for Peter. You know, how did you do it? How did you build this resilience in this process?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 3 left. What's a song or a Bible verse that's carried you through your hardest days?
And I've been thinking about this for a couple days, and it's the shortest verse in the Bible, but Jesus wept. And the reason that I chose that was because in addiction and in my previous life, you lived in a world that men didn't cry, men didn't ask for help, and men didn't say they hurt. And to say that Jesus hurt means that we all can, and we can move forward.
Wow, okay, I got goosebumps. That's good. I love being able to talk about vulnerability because a lot of men in jail that I talk to, you know, have never dug into that, have never processed that. And their dads, just like you said, men don't cry. So their dads didn't cry and said it wasn't okay for them to do that.
Very much true. And I work with people now that still go through that. And that's what we share, that if our Savior could cry, if he could feel, I don't want to say vulnerable, but if he could feel that emotion and he allowed himself to be seen that way, then why can't we?
That's a powerful statement, especially if people look into your past life and now you can say that Jesus wept and I do too. That's a life transformation story right there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, number 7, what's a nickname you had and what's the story behind it?
Skinner. And the reason for that is past life inside, and even before that, I lived in a world that, I'll be honest, I was a skinhead, and it kind of stuck, and now I can say, hey, I've been there, done that, and I've been able to move forward.
Well, you're able to reach so many people, too, because you were in that world, and now you completely live a different life.
Yes, sir.
All right, last icebreaker question. If you had to sum up your testimony in one word, what would it be?
I thought of the name of your podcast, but truly that would be the word that I would think of.
Well, I guess I'm happy to have you on today because this is Resilient Podcast, and I love sharing stories of those people who have had past lives and Christ has transformed them. And as soon as I figured out who you were and I was able to read a little bit on you, listen to you, and notice your books and start thumbing through those, that definitely piqued my interest to want to have you on here. So I love that resilience and being resilient is so close to your heart. So let's lead that into the deeper stuff of our conversation here. And let me ask you about kind of your background. Can you just share a little bit about your background, like where you grew up and what your family life looked like?
Sure. I didn't grow up in one single place. I moved 13 times before I got out of school. My father was a professional fundraiser, worked with everything from United Cerebral Palsy, but also worked with Wycliffe Bible translators and with Open Doors with Brother Andrew, and spent most of my youth in Christian schools. Only went to public school for 2 years, and then went back, and I kind of chuckled at the last school that I went to. I do need to share. It was kind of like going to Footloose, in that it wasn't the Christianity, it was the leadership that began my fall, if you will, from faith, because as a young person and only understanding what you understand without having the knowledge that you have as an adult, the hypocrisy at that time was a whole lot more heartfelt and stabbing to me, if you will. But luckily, by the grace of God, it took me 30 years, but I found my way back.
Okay, so you're moving around as a child. Did you have your mom in the house too?
Yeah, I had my mom and my dad in my house. My dad traveled quite a bit for work, so in a lot of respects, it was kind of like a one-parent household. My dad sometimes would travel 5, 6, 7 weeks at a time, and so with that, there was definitely some angst and some trauma because mom was in charge of everything. So it was not a household that was truly, there was love, yes, but it wasn't huggy-feely.
You could say that just like the verse you talked about, Jesus wept, that wasn't taking place?
No. There was no crying in my house.
Okay, so what was life like before encountering these struggles in addiction and incarceration? You grew up, you said you moved so many times. Did you have siblings in your house? Was it a pretty normal childhood outside of your dad traveling a lot?
I had a sister who was 5 years younger than me, so I was lucky to be the big brother. It was weird in that we never stayed any place that you locked in and you called it home. So I kind of grew up in a world that once you moved, you knew you weren't going to have contact with those people again, or you weren't going to try to reach out. So you kind of found a way to reinvent yourself at each new town or new school or whatever. There weren't really those bonds. You kind of kept everybody at arm's length.
Heard that from some other folks with stories like yours as well, when they're always changing and moving so often. What are some specific challenges or experience that led you to struggle with addiction or ultimately incarceration?
One, trying to, at that point, believing that you had to be the best of the best all the time. The original plan was to go to the Marine Corps. Started that, wound up getting hurt. And when I came back home, you just wanted to be one of the guys. You wanted to be a guy's guy. And not having that ability, as I look back now, to really kind of become chums, if you will, with folks, and build that kind of bond. you looked for and found a circle of friends that were as tough, if not tougher than you. But that also led into the addiction, because I lived in a world that, even with the skins or with the motorcycle clubs, that addiction and alcoholism was commonplace, and it was the norm.
That leads me back to your opening Bible verse again. You just said you were looking to be with the guys that were the toughest of the tough, and just basically one step ahead of you, and you're always looking for the next tough guy. And then as we opened this podcast, you talked about weeping, and what a radical transformation that is. When you were younger, you weren't able to get into the Marines, and you're finding these friends that were tough. I guess I'm just thinking, like, what would you think about weeping at that point?
Not at all, ever. And I'll say that there and with the clubs. Neither one of those worlds was there any ability to have weakness, period, much less to shed a tear. And neither one of those worlds would you ever feel comfortable shedding a tear.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're living a different life today. So how long were you involved with the motorcycle groups, with the skinheads, prior to getting in trouble, being incarcerated?
Well, it all kind of tied in together because of that world. The violence in both led to multiple arrests, multiple arrests, and vacations. We'll say that I didn't plan. I did about 8 years with the skins and seven and a half years with the MC world on the East Coast.
What age were you when you kind of got into the skin world?
Mid-20s. And I will say that it started, of all things, and it's because it's out there, I'm not putting my last name here, but was involved first in the Klan. I worked my way up actually to become an Imperial Wizard in the Klan, but I was more so into the side of guys being guys. And at that point, we wanted to believe that the Klan was religious. I mean, we prayed on the altar, there was a Bible, all of that. But I started meeting at events and things, I started meeting skinheads. And it was about being tough, enjoying rock and roll, believing what you believed as far as heritage and race. And to me, it wasn't even about the politics. It was, again, about guys being guys, but it was very, very easy to get sucked into that. And I'll share with the listeners, especially if they have children, that pay attention to the music that they're listening to in that world. And even being incarcerated, there's white power music, and it shares a message that a lot of times we were able to indoctrinate kids that didn't really, their parents didn't have any idea what they were getting into. It's very easy to start a world that you're doing rock and roll shows. And that actually led to the motorcycle world, because then I became more of an adult and progressed into an even darker world.
Wow. So one thing just kind of led to another.
Yes, literally, it led from one thing. There was not a whole lot of delay in between.
What kind of connection did you have with your mom and dad when you started going down this road?
My mother, I didn't at all, because of my beliefs and who I was affiliated with and what I did, and multiple arrests. There was that love, but there was also that separation even as a child. So getting into adulthood, you didn't want to be the one of go, yeah, look, you were correct, I failed. But at the same token, later on when I got into the MC world, my father's health wasn't good, so my father actually lived with me. And there was that brotherhood, or what we believed is that brotherhood. And I will say, in some respects in the MC world, there is a brotherhood in the family. When I had my accident, I was in ICU for 13 weeks. Members of my club came, picked my father up every single day so he could go to the hospital, and brought him home every day. So they're good and bad, but people need to understand that there's more bad than there is good.
Wow. Okay. So did you grow up, you said you grew up in Christian schooling, but did you grow up with a relationship with Christ and just walk away from it? Or did you really discover a relationship after everything happened?
I want to say after everything happened, because, again, as a kid, yeah, you were baptized and you were things, but you were a kid. You didn't understand it. You did it because you were, that's the way the family did things. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't really a relationship. And then with the last school that I went to, I was one of the few kids that, when I got there my junior and senior year, that didn't grow up in this small school. So we kind of became not only the outsiders, but became kind of the leaders of the students, if you will. We weren't the bad kids, but we were definitely ornery. And there was some things that were put in place for us, that you have to go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And it wasn't for faith. It was so you could check in, so they could punish you. And, oh, you need to do this. And it was done for punishment. So it didn't cause me to have any kind of relationship. It helped me turn away from that. It was in my recovery from substance abuse and alcohol, that feeling very lost, that I truly returned to faith.
What was the experience like returning to faith? Were you in prison? I've heard stories of people being in their cell and just being kind of wrapped in a warm blanket, but they're there alone. I've heard of folks being in a prison yard and hearing someone preach. Were you outside of jail? What does that story look like?
I was outside because when I got back to the free world, I still had an addiction problem. When I finally broke down and God spoke to me and said, hey, enough is enough. There's more for you to do, son, than what you're doing, and you're going to kill yourself. And I'll tell the listeners that, if you ever have a fear and say, hey, I don't fit in church, I'm a heavily tattooed guy that came from an MC world. It was a scary darn thing to walk into a church. And I literally went because I didn't know where to meet people that didn't drink and do drugs. I mean, it'd been such a long path that I was like, what do people do that don't do these things? So I went to a local church, and this I shared with you, Matt, but I want to share this with the listeners. It was a community church here in town. It was a gentleman standing at the door, opening the door. It was a greeter, warm weather, had shorts on, had a very, very specific tattoo on his leg. I have that same tattoo on my upper arm, and I'm not going to describe it for the listeners. I think it's not important, but that means something in the skinhead world, very much so. And I happened to ask this gentleman, I said, does that tattoo in your leg mean such and such? And he looked at me with kind of shock and awe, and then smiled, and he said, you're the first person in this town, we won't name the town, but in this town that knew what that was. And I explained to him I had the same tattoo. And I asked him, I said, does your church, you're a volunteer, does your church know your background? And he looked at me and put his hand out, and he said, yeah, they do. And it startled me, it shocked me. And that was the first step, because I said, if the church can accept you with your background, maybe I'll come back again.
That's amazing. I got goosebumps right now. I know I've already heard that story and still have goosebumps, but that just shows God can use us in any position that we're in, even with our past. And that guy did not expect for you to walk up and have the same tattoo or bring your story or your brokenness to him, but he was just standing there greeting folks. And so God used him just in even, I work in my church too, and there's so many volunteers every week, and sometimes they don't come in thinking that God's going to use them. But I just pray that they come in with their hands open, ready to be used, because that man, with his past life, God used him right where he was, and now you get to be this catalyst for everybody else, and you were touched that day, and it put you on a different path.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you started going back to that church just because of a tattoo, and it led you into a deeper world, a deeper relationship with Christ. What does your relationship now look like, your current ministry in your life with Christ look like?
Okay. After starting to go back to church and actually meeting people and finding out that they weren't, and I'll say this for the listeners too, that, from the outside, we kind of look at in society that it's going to be cookie cutter people that aren't going to like us, aren't going to put up with us. What I found, it was a friendly place, and they were very, very open, and were very willing to let me ask questions and to begin to understand. And it's a very large church. And I say that because even the pastors would just talk to me. I mean, I kind of stand out when you're in the lobby. I don't look like your normal Baptist, and it's not a Baptist church, but I say that in good fun. I look a little different. But they would just talk to me. And I started working my way through, coming back to faith, going through a podcasts and stuff. When I went to the recovery program, I went to a 15-week recovery program, and I started listening to audiobooks because I had a good drive, and trying to better my faith and better understand. And now, this I have to share with the listeners, if they could only see me. I actually am a small group leader for 8-year-olds, for third graders. And just on our service alone, there's roughly about 100 kids, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And I have the minions of the 3rd grade and have such a connection and a love for what I do. And God said, hey, you really are a kid at heart, and you're allowed to have feelings and just have fun. That I've missed a couple weeks because of work, one here and one there. And the pastor of the kids ministry will call and leave a message for me saying, hey, you can't do this 2 weeks in a row. We're going to have a riot. I've taken it a step farther, and we now have a motorcycle ministry. So we can go back to guys that enjoy riding and enjoy the world that I enjoyed, but doing it instead of doing it for club reasons, we do it for Christ. And we can show the world that, hey, you know what? Christians can have fun and we can drive big motorcycles too.
Going back to you being a kid at heart and leading these children, I think we all knew you were a kid at heart when you said you have a Chihuahua, 5-pound Chihuahua named Pinky.
Yeah, and I'll say this is the guy that I am. We actually rescued this dog, and there's a period, and I can't share this on air, but the dog's originally owner, not for this reason, but for others, was not a great person in society. And is actually in federal prison now, obviously not for the dog, but for some very heinous crimes. And when I left the club world, I rolled out of town very quickly, and that was God's reward to me. And I say this, and I want to say this to the listeners too, that, you might think that God doesn't have a sense of humor, but when I had to be away from home for a period of time, it was that 5-pound dog that probably kept me from killing myself and drinking too much, because I had a little buddy. And when I rolled out of the East Coast, that and some of my belongings and the motorcycles, I left with that, and everything else I left behind.
Okay. I actually met another guy in jail. His reason for living was his dog on the outside, his Chihuahua on the outside as well. And so you're not the only one. And it's funny thinking about it. You guys could be brothers the way your appearance as well. In this Chihuahua, he had emailed me from jail saying he needed prayers because his dog had gotten some fentanyl and they had to give the dog Narcan. And so this was at the house it was staying at. And so that was his life, and it really broke him up to hear about what was going on to it.
Yeah, I would do anything for it. And hey, I'll tell the listeners that, what, big tattooed guys, we have little dogs, and they rock.
That's awesome. It's great to find something and really love it and chase after it. I want to bring up your book here, and that's really how I kind of found you. Through a group, and you were advertising this new book that you have. And I didn't tell you, but I just bought 20 copies to take into the Cass County Jail. Got one for each of the pods that we'll be going into, and see about getting some more for individual copies. But I've gone through it. I just actually received all my copies today. But thumbing through it, I've pulled out a couple points that I'll hit on. Your book is called Restored: Discovering Faith, Renewing Hope, and Taking Back Your Life in Christ. So would you like to explain this book a little bit?
Yes, I've actually, when I returned to faith and got out of addiction and alcoholism, I needed a different path. And as you can probably tell, I'm not very shy, I'm not very timid, but I've always had a gift from God that I never understood or explored. And that was just working with people and being with people. And I started a journey, became a mental health peer support specialist, and started talking to people even in some churches. And one, for instance, where I go to church, they have a recovery program. And I just needed to explain two things, and a lot of it was done for me to better understand me, was the fact that, one, our past does not define us. It can refine us, but it doesn't define us any longer through Christ. Your past is your past. And the second part is kind of interweaves with that no matter what we've done and how far we've gone, and I take it from my own personal experience, that I couldn't have gone much farther, at least in my own brain, from faith and from God and accepting Christ. But that being said, that he never went away. He never said, well, you know what, I've knocked on that door too many times and you've never accepted it. When I finally broke down and said, enough is enough, I need to get clean, I need to get sober, and I need to find a direction, God said, you know what, son, I'm still there, still here. And that was the reason that I started that book.
I don't want to skip over, I feel like a Jim you just said, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said our past doesn't define us, but it refines us.
Yes.
And so that's what you're doing through this book right here. And you're not letting these, and really that's what that man did with the tattoos at the greeting at the church. He was being refined through his relationship with Christ, and God used him while he was serving him.
Yes, very much so, that if we allow God to use the gifts and understand the gifts that he's given to us, we can truly make a difference. We just have to understand that. And again, going back to the past doesn't define us. When I first got clean and sober and I first got back to the real world and all of that and started going a different direction, there's obviously some things that hold you back, like your background. When I volunteered with the church, they obviously do a background check. My federal background check is 4 pages long. And then you start thinking, well, holy cow, what am I going to do? I'm going to pump gas or something like that, I'm not going to be able to do anything. But start praying about it and continue to pray about it. So there's still definitely a journey. I actually started my own LLC so that I could give back to community and people that suffer and people that struggle. And one of the areas that I do that, I volunteer with the felony drug courts in my county as a mentor and a peer support specialist. And it gives me a great opportunity. And even the judge allows, a lot of what we do is one-on-one, things like that. And I keep up with these folks. And I do it voluntarily. But I brought faith up to the whole crowd or to the whole group in the courtroom, which is not a normal thing in our world in this day and age. But the judge is like, keep going, because that's what got you here. And it truly is, guys. It was God. It wasn't me. And if we, again, believe that where we were isn't who we are now, keep going. Every single day, keep going.
Let me read something out of your book here real quick for the listeners, because I had highlighted it when I opened it, and I think it goes well with what you're saying. This is just in the first chapter here. It says, building resilience through faith is about more than just overcoming past hurts. It is about thriving in spite of them. Each challenge faced can be an opportunity to deepen your relationship with God and strengthen your spiritual foundation. As you learn to trust in His plan, you gain the tools needed to navigate life's difficulties. This resilience empowers you to not only heal, but also to help others heal who may be struggling in their own pasts. In this way, your experiences can become a source of inspiration and hope, showcasing the transformative power of faith in action. That's exactly what you are doing, Stephen, right there in the courtroom as you're volunteering in these drug programs.
It's instead of being ashamed of my past, what it's being able to do is God said, hey, you know what? Don't hide it. I've become very comfortable with my past in that now I'm very open about it. This is where I was. This is where I was incarcerated. This is how many times I got locked up, whatever that might be. But that there's hope that with the right direction and with faith that I am where I am now, and I'm not that guy, and I'm not going back to that guy. And it's as folks in several different groups that I facilitate and different things will laugh that I say it all the time that, if this guy can change, anybody can.
Agree. In Cass County Jail, there's a guy with tattoos on his hands. On one hand, it says, I think, one life, and the other hand says to live. And I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, we just got one life to live. And I kind of tried to contradict him and said, man, I feel like I got two lives. I got a life before Christ, a life before being saved, and I got this brand new life. I'm so renewed after my life, accepting Christ into my life, and see what He's done, because only He can do that. And so if you're really living in that renewed life, that transformed life, you don't feel like you're living your past life. You use it as your experiences, just like you said. Our past doesn't define us, but it can refine us. So live in that refined life that Christ has given you.
Very, very, very true.
Okay, so is there anything you want to touch on your book? I guess before I'm going to cut you off on that, I've been through most of it here this morning, and I had a thought of, I like this podcast that I put on, but I can't give it to those in jail because it's not in paper format. And right. I thought, just because the jail that I go into doesn't have any availability for that. And it's funny, going through your book, this is a Resilient podcast wrapped up into a book for these guys and gals to read. And so I had bought 20 copies, just planning to take them to the each one of the pods, but going through it, I feel like each and every man and woman needs a copy of this to go through, because I think this is really great for them to see your life. And just like you said a moment ago, if I can change, anybody can change.
Yes, sir. And that's too why, and we'll bring this up at the end, but for the listeners, this book wasn't done for money. On Kindle, on the Unlimited, it's free. To buy an ebook, it's $1. The paperback is $5.75. I don't do this for the money. Obviously, I do it because the message needs to get out, and the message needs to be told, and people need to understand that there's somebody else that's been there, done that, and is right alongside them. We're not telling them they're wrong. We're telling them that God's right.
I think it's comforting to know that you don't have to reinvent the wheel to beat recovery or get through recovery to have a relationship with Christ, you just got to come alongside someone else that is doing it already. And I know Proverbs talks about that so much. And also, we're the average of the 5 people that we hang around. But you're just telling everyone in your past life that, hey, you can do it too. It's almost like you're that brother next to him saying, come on, bud, I'm right here next to you, and I'll encourage you along the way. And I really feel like that's what this book, Restored, does.
Yeah, I agree. Because again, I live in a world now that I give my number out all day, every day, and in different groups that I'm with be it with adult probation, with addiction classes, with the courts, with different places, that I'm like, you know what, I would much rather have you call me at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I may have only met you once, but I'd much rather you call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, I'm struggling, and just let me give you an ear. Or if it's really bad, say, hey, you know what, let's go to Denny's. Oh, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And it may sound like I'm making this up, but it is what it is. That's the world that I live in now, because by the grace of God, I'm alive. And I'm here, and I'm not wearing bracelets. And I would much rather have somebody know that, like you said, that I'm there. And that's the greatest thing about being recovered, guys, and being restored by Christ, is that all you have to do is be. My day now is just to, if I'm able to assist others. I'm not trying to fix anything. I can't fix anything. God can fix things. It's not for us to fix them. It's for us to listen. And I'll be the first to admit that I was the biggest bonehead going for 30 years, that I didn't listen. And if you just open your ears and listen, it's amazing how much different, even on the tough days, how much different that day can be.
I know you said you wanted to have dinner with Peter, if you could,
yes,
someone biblically, but it seems like as you're talking, I think you're more of a Paul person yourself, because you were running so hard in one direction for so long, and then you had your road to Damascus experience, and you're radically transformed. And, that's what Paul did his entire time, although after being transformed is when he got into prison. But now that you're out of prison, you're living your transformed life, and you're building and you're growing these networks for these other folks. And really, it's all glory to God. Just like you said, you're not doing this for the money, and you're the guy answering the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning to support these men and women as they're going through their addictions and coming through that. But you've already lived in that position. But if you didn't live in that position, you would not have that zeal or that passion that you do today.
Very true. And the one other thing I'd like for the listeners to understand is, be it recovery, be it incarceration, be it whatever it might be, as you're listening to this podcast for a reason, because you either have faith or trying to learn to have faith or to understand what faith is. After your past, be that person that you didn't have it when you were struggling. That's my biggest thing, is I want to be that person that what could have been different in my life when I was struggling if I would have had that person that would have picked the phone up at 2 o'clock in the morning. What might have changed? And it doesn't make me a great person. It just makes me a person. It just took me all those years to figure that out.
I think that's a good message. And I'll even teach in one little class at church, and we'll talk about small groups. And I usually say, if you don't see a small group that resonates with you, start that small group. And the funny thing is, the way I got into jail ministry is someone asked me to lead a small group, and I'd never done that. So leading into kind of something that you're uncomfortable with, but you see a need for it, and you wished it was there at a time in your life when it came up. And so I think that's good advice on your side. Be that person that wasn't there for you. I have 2 young boys, and I tell them to lead into the butterflies in your stomach. Push past those 10 seconds of nervousness, and then you see the beautiful results on the other side of it and what God has for you.
Yes, sir. And I tell a lot of the folks, and I try to live by this now, or to understand it, work better toward it. They say statistically that if you can make a change in a person, and that change may be just as small as, because we don't know how people's days are going, especially strangers, what's bothering them. Of just making that little change of maybe opening a door and asking them how they are and actually listening, or giving somebody a smile and saying, hey, you know what? I'm really glad you're here today. They say statistically that if you can make a change in 8 people during your lifetime, in 2 generations, you'll have made the change in the entire population, the people-wise, of the United States of America. And in another generation, it'll have touched the population of the world. And that might be as small as something of opening a door or saying, hey, come on into church. Come to church with me. Might be just that. What you might feel is that small could be a tremendously huge thing and life-changing thing for somebody.
I think that's a great statistic. You can probably also look at it backwards as well. If you have a negative impact on somebody, and we all have these choices on how we want to live our life. Again, at church, sometimes in this group I lead, I talk about leaving church and going to Walmart afterwards and acting crazy, and everyone seeing those folks that they saw walk out of church acting crazy. Who are we actually wearing our Jesus name tag or our Jesus clothes? I know you've said it before, sometimes we are the only Bible some folks will read. And so just leading by example.
Very much true. And coming from the restaurant world, which is where the majority of my career was, I will say this to everybody. Again, when you leave church, and just like you were saying, Matt, what do we show the world? The big in the restaurant world and that job field, the number one group of people that are made fun of the most are the people that go out to eat on Sunday after church. As sad as that is, because the joke is with non-believers and restaurant people is, they're going to go to church and they're going to pray to their Jesus and they're going to give their 10%, and then they're going to come here and they're going to act a fool and they're going to leave me 5.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's sad, but I mean, that's all I'll say is this: don't be that Christian.
Live a restored life, just like your book talks about.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so do you have any more you want to add onto this book before we move into more of a message for the audience?
For anybody that'd like to look it up, it is on Amazon. The name, again, is Restored. But you can also go to altogether, no spaces, recoveredmotivatedbooks.com.
And that website will be in the description of this podcast as well. Okay, so we have talked about from your childhood, we've talked about imprisonment, being with motorcycle groups, skinhead groups, the Klan, into a transformation, starting to go to church and realizing that it's not all perfect people that go to church, and it's people with a past that need a savior as well, which is fantastic to realize, and then we go into your life of becoming an author, a speaker, a peer support specialist, volunteering at drug courts and speaking in these trials to these judges, and they're even seeing your life transformation and kind of digging in and wanting to lean into that more. So you've lived this life, and you said in this podcast that if I can change my life, you definitely can change your life. And I kind of put that to the Apostle Paul as well, similar to that. But do you now have a message to everybody that's listening on this podcast, or something that you share in your life as well to those kind of that you're leading?
Yes. And again, it falls into, and I know I say it a lot, but I believe it, that your past doesn't define you. But the bigger message to that is to listen, because God is speaking to us and he's reaching out to us, but we have to listen. And in doing that, coming from whatever world, we're not as tough as we want to believe we are, but God is, and he's there for us. And don't give up. That's the biggest thing I can say to everybody is, don't give up. Listen. Yes, things aren't going to always be rosy, but you know what? It's a whole lot better with Christ. And he has a mission for us. He has a direction for us. And again, we just have to listen in order to find it. And I mean, he's brought me to a place that, again, instead of always having to win, I can just be. And even with tough days and with struggles, I'm in a whole lot better place. And each and every day that I can wake up and thank the Lord that for some of us that have done this, that maybe had some vacations, again, that we're not incarcerated, that we're not in bracelets, that we're not riding with the car. Do what we do. And guys, my advice would be, just listen and accept it. You might be the baddest guy in the room, but God is better.
That's good. I want to close here with the ending of your book. And it says, in cultivating a life of grace and resilience, you are not just overcoming your past, you are being shaped into a vessel of hope for others, showing them that through faith you can rise and thrive. I think that is a fantastic way to end your book there, Stephen. And I just really want to thank you for being on here today with me. And I really feel honored that we were able to connect like this, and you've been so willing and gracious to help me out in this.
And I definitely thank you, and I thank you for all the work that you do, and especially even after the first time that we talked, and I looked up more about you and the websites and the podcast, just the amount of work that you're doing and your volunteer staff with the prison ministries. Maybe not having been inside, you don't understand how much of a difference that makes, because a lot of our brothers that are behind the wire are just looking for somebody to care and to believe in them. So just keep doing what you're doing, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Stephen. What an incredible conversation with Stephen today. His story is a powerful reminder that no one is too far gone for God's grace. As Stephen writes in his book, resilience is forged in the fires of adversity, and your faith can be the spark that ignites your endurance. So, no matter where you've been or what you've faced, God can restore, redeem, and use your story for His glory. If this episode encouraged you, be sure to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so we can reach more people with stories of hope and transformation. Keep pressing on, keep trusting God, and stay resilient.